Well, who is Suzanne Simpson, and did her husband kill her? Now, he's in jail on domestic violence and weapons charges, and she's nowhere to be found after a neighbor reported hearing the couple fighting, followed by screams. His family is baffled about his behavior. Brad Simpson isn't cooperating with police in this missing woman's case. So I want to look into the case and 5 important considerations to think about as you do your own crime sleuthing. Hey, welcome to Profiling Evil, and thanks so much for hitting that subscribe button down below. Make sure you're hitting the like button, giving us a thumbs up, all of that, and please share us with your friends. Now, I wanted to do this video hoping Texas law enforcement would have recovered Suzanne's body from a Bexar County landfill. That was their hope, and frankly, that was what I was waiting for. But now, police have walked away from the dump empty-handed. So let's recap this timeline that brought us to this point in the case, starting with some victimology, the study of the victim. And then we'll talk a little bit about suspectology, the study of the suspect. And then I'm going to hit my 5 points. Suzanne Simpson is a 51-year-old mother of several children, and I'm purposely not saying how many children. She's a professional real estate agent, something that she's worked at for more than a dozen years, and appears that she's very successful at it. She also has worked in technology sales. Now, again, like I said, it appears that she's been really successful in her career, and she has a number of real estate properties registered to her name, namely a piece of property that she lives in, her home where she was last seen, and another nice piece of property alongside the Guadalupe River, and I think that might be significant. Now, Suzanne has a close circle of friends, and that suggests that she has a pretty consistent lifestyle. She's a college graduate from the University of Texas, and she also attended the Texas Military Institute. Now this is from her Facebook page and other research I've done. She seems to be active on social media, with posts on her Facebook page as recently as the day in which she disappeared. Making a sudden cessation of activity on her social media accounts, her phone, or her regular contact with family seem entirely out of character. It makes me wonder if she was the primary breadwinner in the relationship. Now, Brad Chandler Simpson, her husband, is a 53-year-old guy who spent much of his adult career as an investor in a number of different private partnerships. He did spend about a decade working for a large property management company in the San Antonio area where he served as a manager. But that kind of ended in an embroiled legal battle in which there were allegations of fraud. Now, this guy's also had a number of debt collection actions taken against him from his credit card company. Reportedly, he settled those at the end of all of the lawsuits, I think 2 in total. Simpson also purchased a 3-acre piece of ground about an hour west of their home. And this is the location where I believe this guy was arrested. Now, an online search revealed that he too attended the University of Texas, but I don't know if he received a degree. I've not been able to determine if this guy is active on social media, but it doesn't appear so. According to media reports, both Brad and Suzanne would have a drink occasionally, but it's unknown if there were any dependency issues going on in the house. But here are some things we know from law enforcement officially released and provide us a timeline of what was going on. First is let's go back to October 6th, 2024. This is when Brad and Suzanne Simpson attended a party at a members-only club in San Antonio called the Argyle. Now, the restaurant is only a mile from their home, at least by way of the crow's flight, but it was about a 4-minute drive if they jumped in the car. So this thing is incredibly close. Now, reports suggest the couple had been drinking at the party and that they were arguing when they left the party. Now, that same evening, believed to be right after they left the party, one of Simpson's neighbors, who lives across the street, heard the couple arguing out front of their house. The neighbor finally looked out the window and observed a disturbance going on, a fight, which seemed to escalate somewhere around the 10 to 11 p.m. or time period. Now, the neighbor later told police that as the argument escalated, it became physical, and it included Brad Simpson picking up his wife Suzanne around the upper torso and kind of pulling her or throwing her to the ground. He also apparently grabbed her phone at that time. Now, the neighbor said that he was doing this, in the neighbor's opinion, to keep Suzanne from running away. Now, this concerned neighbor was so troubled by what was going on that he went and grabbed a flashlight and went outside looking for them. And I'm supposing it's a man here. I don't know if it was a man or a woman. But while doing so, the neighbor reportedly heard 2 to 3 screams coming from the woods across the street from the house where the Simpsons lived. Now, I'm showing you a map here of where the Simpson home is, and I'm going to kind of turn this and look at the woods and then pan back and give you another map kind of showing how close the woods are to the front door of the Simpson home. So here's the thing that I think is the first question. If this was Suzanne in the woods screaming, she either fled to the woods in pursuit by potentially Brad, or she was dragged there, given the fact that we know that he picked her up and was forcing her to the ground. Well, shortly after those screams were heard, the neighbor reportedly saw Brad Simpson leave the couple's home in their GMC pickup truck. The truck was gone for about an hour. So I'm creating a map showing how far someone could travel in about 25 minutes and still get back to the residence, leaving about 10 minutes of unobligated time for something nefarious like pulling a body out of the vehicle and disposing it somewhere. And this is all theorizing based on the information that's come out thus far. So it really kind of helps us start to understand how much law enforcement has to consider all of the areas that are within this drive time area that I've created. I mean, think about it. The landfill where they just completed the search. Any place where a body could be concealed, including burying a body in one of the many uninhabited areas within this drive time zone. Now, this is assuming that the body was dumped in its final resting spot that evening, rather than perhaps being moved the following day to another more acceptable location. So there might be multiple crime scenes. And this is really interesting because we don't have time accounted for the following day. But this shows how complex this can be. And kind of to highlight that, I'm including a map that includes not only all the highlighted areas, the house and the other places within the drive time zone, but the bodies of water and the streams where a body could potentially be concealed underwater. I mean, think about how complex this is. And I bring up the possibility of a body being moved during the morning hours of the 7th because there's a ping from Suzanne's phone at 7:15 that morning. The mobile phone ping is recorded in a business parking area in the Almas Park area. And again, we Brad Simpson's actions and travels aren't public at this time, so we can only theorize. But I'm confident that law enforcement has begun, if not already obtained, all of the forensic digital footprint that might be available, including that vehicle computer system. Now again, we don't have any information on where Brad Simpson was between those early morning hours when the truck returned after the fight and what happened during the day up until the time of 3 p.m. because that's when he reportedly received a call from his 5-year-old child's school stating that his wife hadn't picked up the kids from school. So I'm wondering, how did the child get to school? And is there any kind of digital footprint? That might tell us if Suzanne was alive that morning. Now, Simpson apparently waited for some time before reporting her disappearance to police. And when police tried to get him to come into the station for questioning, he refused to show up. And again, keep in mind how important this is to know when he dropped that child off at school, if he dropped them off, or if Suzanne dropped the child off. That's going to be pivotal in impeaching what he might have to say about being surprised at 3 p.m. Now, police indicated that Brad Simpson became uncooperative and he left the area for his ranch in Bandera County, which is about 40 miles to the west of their home near Lake Medina. Now, this is an area outside of that initial 1-hour drive time analysis I did, but it's only 55 minutes from their home. This location could have easily been reached on the 7th during those unobligated hours between the early morning hours when he returned home and when he picked up his truck or his child at 3 p.m. Now, I also think it's really interesting to note that Suzanne also owns a piece of property to the east of their home on the Guadalupe River. Now, that home is 36 miles to the east, a 40-minute drive one way. Now, to show how complex these investigations can get, I found the stream gauge information for the Guadalupe River for those days in which are in question. And I'm showing them in this video animation, kind of proving that the river would be about 11.5 to 12 feet deep, but very slow moving. You know, I've worked a lot of cases where the body and vehicle has been recovered in less than 12 feet of water, especially in water that's brown like this water is. Now, I'm going to show you this little video clip here that kind of shows what that river looks like and how easy it would be to conceal something even a foot under the water. So something could easily be hidden below the surface. And if her body ended up in a place like that, especially if it had been weighted down, she might never be recovered. But again, it shows the complexity of trying to search for her body in this drive time area alone, let alone the greater San Antonio area. Well, by October 8th, police learned that Simpson's 5-year-old daughter told school employees that her parents had been fighting on the night that Suzanne disappeared. And the child reported that Brad hit Suzanne in the face, and he might have also pushed her into a wall. The child also indicated that the child witnessed bruising on Suzanne's elbow. Well, the following day, the 9th, police arrested Brad Simpson and charged him with unlawful restraint and assault causing bodily injury to a family member. These are violations that are misdemeanors in Texas. But a day later, law enforcement served a search warrant on the Simpson home where they recovered multiple firearms that were violating federal law in reporting, not in the kind of weapon, but in reporting ownership of that weapon. Now, these added charges have brought Simpson's bail to $2 million, but also a federal charge that makes it much more difficult for him to get bail. So he remains in jail. A few days after that, family and friends held a vigil for Suzanne Simpson. Now, one reporter showed up and looked around and finally had a contact with Suzanne's mother. And she said that Suzanne's mother told her that Brad Simpson had hit her daughter. Now, other reports suggest that the family doesn't believe that Suzanne is alive any longer, including law enforcement who suggested that the search at the landfill was a recovery effort. Let's watch this clip from the news.
She did tell me that she knew about prior confrontations that Suzanne and Brad had, and she was worried for Suzanne and was going to ask Suzanne to leave. So let's hear what she had to say.
Suzanne and I had an opportunity to talk an hour before a lot of this has happened, and I don't understand and why and what happened. and I hope someday I'll be able to understand the situation. Well, I came up with an alternative plan for her and hope that she'd move in with me and have her little toddler go to the elementary school in my neighborhood. I never got to tell her the plan.
I think the most shocking revelation that came from that interview was that Suzanne's mother, Barbara, told me, "I know and I can feel that Suzanne is not alive." And I knew the minute they called me from the child's school that Suzanne had not picked them up, that was the moment that I knew Suzanne was gone.
Well, I can't definitively say what happened to Suzanne Simpson without further details or official statements from law enforcement. Some likely scenarios emerge based on the circumstances, including her husband's arrest for domestic violence and weapons charges. So these are clues that suggest her disappearance might be linked to a pattern of abusive behavior, though this remains speculative until more facts are uncovered. But here are a few potential scenarios that authorities could be exploring and that we might want to keep in mind as we do our own personal online sleuthing. Number one is an escalation in domestic violence. Now, Brad Simpson's arrest for domestic violence themes suggests a history of abuse, which may have escalated to a tragic outcome. In many cases where a spouse disappears under similar circumstances, it's not uncommon for law enforcement to suspect that the violence was caused by someone close to them and that they had a direct role in what happened. Again, go back and watch my videos on the victimology and risk continuum. You might also go back and watch my videos on domestic violence homicide with Dr. Jane Monckton Smith. You can find those in the Profiling Evil playlist, and I would really encourage you looking into those. Now, number two is her disappearance might be part of a cover-up of homicide. Again, kind of tied to number one. But given Brad's arrest for weapons charges as well, there might be concerns that Suzanne's disappearance could involve foul play and a gunshot. Now, if Brad had any involvement, he might attempt to cover up the crime, dispose of evidence, including Suzanne's body, and that might explain why she hasn't been found. Now, the presence of illegal weapons or firearms raises the possibility of lethal violence. But that said, remember that the neighbor reported hearing screams. There was no mention of hearing gunshots. So again, that might be less likely unless that happened at a secondary location. Number three, Brad has to be a person of interest. He was the last person seen with her, and they were arguing and in a physical confrontation. Now, even though Brad Simpson has been arrested on separate charges, law enforcement undoubtedly considers him to be a key figure in Suzanne's disappearance, particularly due to the timing of the arrest. Now, if there had been tensions, threats, or violent incidences leading up to her vanishing, that would naturally make him a prime suspect. And remember, the mother reported that Suzanne told her that she'd been hit by Brad. I think it's also important to point out that Brad's brother, Barton, has indicated that he and the family are incredibly confused that Brad is failing to cooperate with police in this investigation. That has to remain very critical in our consideration. Number four, you got to think about whether there was an abduction or some kind of coercion. And again, like less likely, another possible scenario is that Brad's involvement in her disappearance may not have been directly violent, but it could have included coercion, intimidation, threats. Maybe there were domestic violence and Suzanne had to flee the area to just get away and be safe. Now, this is less likely given the charges against him, and authorities might have to investigate the possibility that Suzanne's hiding due to fear for her safety. But my question is, do you really think she would have gone without notifying her children, or that there would be any kind of digital footprint? Number five, that all of this might be unrelated to Brad's arrest. And although unlikely, less probable, there's always a chance that Suzanne's disappearance is unrelated to her husband's charges. However, given the strong correlation between domestic violence, historically by media reports, and that night, and the disappearance of Suzanne, this scenario seems less likely without further evidence. Hey, I'd really like to know your thoughts on this missing persons case, possibly this homicide case. Do you believe for a minute that Suzanne Simpson would have taken off without having contact with her children or her family? Remember, her mother said they talked almost daily. Do you think she would turn off her phone and leave no digital footprint? It just seems unlikely to me. And I hope you'll put your comments down below. And please take time to weigh in on other people's comments. Be courteous and kind and professional as we explore this case together. Now, at this stage, without more information from the ongoing investigation, it's speculative but plausible that Suzanne's disappearance is tied to a pattern of domestic violence or foul play. Law enforcement's going to continue to piece this thing together, including the timeline, forensic evidence, witness accounts, admissions, and perhaps even at some point confessions about whether Brad was involved or if other factors contributed to Suzanne Simpson's disappearance. The best course of action to follow is to listen for and watch for official updates. And as more information becomes available, I would just encourage you to be cautious about developing theories before you have facts. Hey, please look for Profiling Evil on Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, and Twitter. And if you like audio podcasts, make sure you're checking out Profiling Evil podcasts on your favorite podcast platform. I want to remind you about my books, Deceived, an investigative memoir of the Zion Society cult, and She Knew No Fear. If you order them by clicking on the QR code on the screen, I'll personalize them and ship them anywhere in the USA for free. Now, if you live outside the United States, just go to Amazon and order the book directly. And please check out Profiling Evil's website at profilingevil.com. Make sure you're signing up for our digital newsletter, The Bolo. Hey, thanks so much for your support of Profiling Evil, and we'll see you soon at the next crime scene.